Hello guys, today we are going to talk about UV unwrapping. A lot of people I meet in the industry are actually afraid of UVs. They think it's the most boring part of the pipeline. Most artists love only modeling and texturing, but often UVs are seen something as technical thing or something as very boring. But the truth is, once you understand it, UV unwrapping becomes very logical and easy to do. Let's take a look at UV unwrapping with the help of an example. So assume that this is our object and we would want to draw something on it, something like a circle. Let's grab a pen and let's actually check if the pen is actually working or not. Yes, it's working. So let's try and draw a circle, and now you can see that it is very difficult to draw something on an object like this. Let's try on the other side. Maybe we can get it right, but it is not very convenient to draw on an object like this. Okay, now let's assume that this is the object and we make a cut behind it and lay it flat on the ground, and now when we try to draw on it, it becomes really easy. It doesn't wobble when we try to draw on it. We are able to make the drawing on the paper or the object when we lay it flat completely on the ground. Let's try to close the object again. And as you can see, it looks really nice, and it was really easy to draw when it was flat on the ground. So this, my friend, is UV unwrapping. Now let's take a look at something that is more practical inside Maya. We start with the cylinder, just like the example that we had. So we have a bunch of primitive objects here. And what we will do is go through each one of them, and then that will help you understand the basic concepts of UV unwrapping. So let's start with the cylinder. So what we do is we make cuts exactly where we did in the example, and also to the edges that are closer to 90-degree angles. So this is the edge that we are going to mark a seam on, and also this one at the bottom. Now to mark a seam, we select the object and go to UVs and apply camera based mapping on it, and then go to object mode, and then we again go to UVs and select 3D cut and sieve tool. This will help mark seams inside 3D directly. So we mark a seam here at closer to 90-degree angle, and one more at the bottom, and one more vertically, just like the example, so that we can lay it flat. Now that we have our cuts or seams ready, we go to object mode, UV editor, go to UVs, select all the UVs and press Ctrl U to lay it flat or unfold. Now to straighten this, just select this edge and shift right click and straighten shell. Now we accidentally made cuts here which we shouldn't have. Now let's try to fix that. To fix that, what we need to do is select the edges that we made cuts on and hold shift right click and move and sew edges to stitch them together. Now let's do the same on another circle. Select the seams that we don't want, shift right click, move and sew edges to stitch them together. Now let's just select all the UVs and press Ctrl plus L to lay out them in a 0 to 1 UV space. So let's apply a checker map on our object to see how UVs perform on an object. So let's go ahead and select our object and apply a checker map on it. I already have created one. Let's turn off the default shading to see the texture. As you can see that all the squares are almost identical and there is almost no distortion. So by that we can say that this is a good UV. Now let's imagine a scenario where the UVs are distorted. So let me show you by an example. Let's go back to UV editor, select the UVs. Now I hold some UVs and hold soft selection and B with middle mouse, and then let's try to distort them a little bit like this. Now this is an exaggerated example, of course, but this gives you an idea what a bad UVs look like. Some amount of distortion is fine in organic objects, but ideally we want to try to have it as low as possible. So now let's look at how our object looks. See, this is something that we definitely want to avoid, and this is not a very good UVs. So let's undo a bit till it was perfect. So yeah, this is the basics of how we would unwrap a cylinder or any cylindrical object. Up next, we'll see how we can unwrap a cube. Let's select our cube and press Ctrl+1 to isolate it. Now there are multiple ways to unwrap a cube, but if you have any experience with 3D before, the basic cube, like the primitive cube, always is unwrapped like a packaging box, which isn't incorrect but also not very efficient according to me. I will show all the methods including this one so that you know how to unwrap a cube. So let's take our cube, turn off the shading and duplicate it a couple of more times, and select this one and then apply camera based mapping. And now we mark seams such that it will lay flat as a single sheet of paper, just like a box of packaging that we saw earlier. So we mark seams here. Okay, let's go back. Let's mark seam here and here and one here and one more here and here. Now let's try to unfold it and see how it looks. So this is how exactly the box will unwrap. Now the reason I say that this is not the best way to unwrap is because it is wasting a lot of space, and I'll talk more about this in the future videos. But this isn't incorrect but not the best way. Now let's see a different method. In this method we add just one additional seams so that the box is divided into two UV islands, and then distributing it along the 0 to 1 UV space is much more cleaner, and we waste a lot less amount of space than previously. So now mark the seams and then go back to UV editor and flatten it or unfold it. Now you can see that there are two different UV islands. Straighten them and then select both of them and hit Ctrl+L to layout. Now you can see that this is much more cleaner than previous version of unwrapping. We are wasting a lot less amount of space here. Always remember, the least amount of space we use, the better our texture quality is. Now let's go ahead and apply a checker map to see how the texture looks. Now as you can see that it looks much more cleaner, and if we compare it to the other one, you can see the textile density or the size of the box is smaller in the second version than the first version. And the reason is exactly what I told you just now. We are wasting less amount of space in the second version. That's why it is spanning across more space and more cube or checker maps, as you can see. And in the first version, we are not using the space very well. Now let's take a look at the third example, which is I use. And the reason I use this method is because this allows me to manage the UV shells wherever I want in the UV space. Imagine having a lot of objects and you would want to place each of the UV shell differently so that we utilize the maximum space as possible. So I mark seams almost everywhere, like angles closer to 90-degree angle. And then when we go to UV editor and unfold and lay out everything, we are able to place each individual shell as a puzzle, and we are no longer restricted to keep everything as a one UV shell and then place them in just a limited amount of space. Now here I can take this shell and then move it wherever I want. Imagine if I had another object and then I would want to move this shell. So it would be really difficult if we had just one whole object. So like this, it becomes really easy. So this is the reason why I use this method sometimes. And let's see and apply a checker map. Now this is almost as good as the second one. Now let's take a look how we can unwrap a cone. Now we select the cone, go to UV's camera based mapping, and then select 3D cut and sew tool, and then mark a seam here and then mark a seam here. What I do is select the faces and convert it to camera based. The reason I'm doing this is because we won't be able to mark a complete loop if with the 3D cut tool. And the reason for that is if I try to double click this edge, it will stop at where there are only 3 edges connecting. That's why it doesn't know how to complete the loop. Whereas if you select this edge, which has 4 connections, it will complete the loop. So instead of manually selecting all the edges, I selected the face, converted to camera based mapping, and it will automatically mark a seam for us. Now let's mark another seam here. Go to object mode, UV editor, select all the UVs, Ctrl+U and Ctrl+L to layout. And there we go. We have unwrapped our cone, and let's apply a checker map texture. And it looks very clean. So this is how we unwrap a cone. Now let's see how we can unwrap a sphere. So it's the same method. We select the sphere and apply camera based mapping. We mark seams on the top and the bottom poles. So we select the faces. We select one face, hold tab and then drag across the circular faces, and then we do the same thing on the bottom faces. Then we hold Ctrl, right click, 2 faces and 2 faces perimeter. Then we go to UV editor and hold Shift+X to mark a seam. And now we need to mark one more seam so that it can lay flat and unwrap. So mark a seam here, and then let's go to UV editor, select everything and press Ctrl+U to unwrap, and press Ctrl+L to layout. Select one seam and straighten shell, and then unwrap it again and layout. Now let's apply a checker map texture and see how it looks. Turn off default shading. And now you can see it has a little bit of distortion, which is acceptable in an organic shape. But as long as it is not completely distorted, it is fine. Just like the exaggerated example I showed you previously in a cylinder. Like this, for example. Yeah, this is something that we want to avoid for sure. So this is how we unwrap a cylinder. Now let's take a look at donut. So the best way to unwrap any object that is like a tube or like a pipe, there's a best way to unwrap it. So we select the object, apply camera based mapping, go to UV editor, and then select all the UVs, shift right click and click on unitize. Now what we do is go to edge mode and select all the edges by dragging across the square. And what we want to do is deselect where we want our cut or seams to be. So let's deselect this edge loop here in the center and turn off the shading, and one more over here so that it can unwrap. Now let's go back to our UV editor, hold shift right click and move edges and sew. And now select everything, press Ctrl plus L, and now we can unfold it along V and again unfold along U, and then press Ctrl plus L again to layout. Now let's apply a checker map and see how it looks. And it looks really clean. Now that we have a basic understanding of how to unwrap basic primitive objects, in the next example we'll take a look at a much more complex object that will bring all the knowledge that we have learned all together. Now this is the object that has all the shapes that we have learned. So now we are going to learn how to unwrap this object. You can also see them in color coded version here, which differentiates all the shapes like torus, cube, cone, etc. Now let's start unwrapping this. So we apply basic camera based mapping to the whole object. Now go to our UV editor and place it like this so that it is easier to mark seams and also unwrap simultaneously. So let's start by marking a seam here at the cone. So select this edge to mark a seam here and zoom in a little bit, and also mark a seam over here at the top part of the cone, and one more vertical seam so that it can unwrap. Now select a few UVs of that shell, Ctrl right click and 2 UV shell so that it completely select all the UV shell associated with it. And now we press Ctrl plus U on it with the side, and now this part is unwrapped. Now let's unwrap the sphere now. So now we go to 3D cut tool and then just mark a seam here, and then in our UV editor select the whole shell, move it aside and unwrap it by pressing Ctrl plus U. Now let's go ahead and unwrap the cube. Actually not unwrapping it like that, press undo. We'll unwrap the bottom part first and then move this part up, select it and unfold and move it aside. And now let's make a cut here. Okay, now observe what happens when I try to unwrap it. Turn off the shading and now you can see. So we also need to mark more cuts here and on the other side so that it unwraps much more cleanly. Let's see how it looks after unwrapping. Yeah, it looks much more cleaner than before. So you should always know where to mark seams. Now let's go ahead and unwrap the tube. Mark one seam here and mark another seam here, and we mark one more seam here so that it opens. Now go to UV editor, select it and move it aside. Let's see how it behaves after unwrapping. Straighten it and unwrapping it again. And now let's create some space because we want to unitize it like the way we unwrapped the tube in the example. Let's move everything aside, select that UV shell and shift right click and unitize it. Now go to edges, select all the edges of that. Now we deselect the seams, like parts where we want to have a cut. So we deselect this edge loop and the edge loop on the other side over here, and one more edge loop in the center, but it is not working well, so we will have to select it manually. So let's turn off the shading first and minimize the UV tool, and we deselect these edges and this too up till the end. Let's go back to our UV editor and shift right click, move and sew edges together. And now it unwrapped almost like a tube. We press Ctrl plus L and then unwrap it along V. Now if you unfold it again, this doesn't look very neat. So instead of unwrapping it completely, we just unwrap it along V. So if we try to unwrap along U, it doesn't look good. So we just keep it along V. So now let's just go ahead and unwrap the cylinder, mark a seam here and unwrap it. Ctrl plus U and straighten the shell. And there we go. And now we want to make sure that all the shells are straight, like perpendicular. So we go through each shell, select the edge that we want it to be straight and then straighten them. This will help us in laying out a clean UV. Now select all the UVs and now press Ctrl plus L. This is not ideal because it is wasting some space. So what we will do is edit some setting. So go to modify and click on the box near layout. Now change this to 4096, which is 4K, and iterations to 10, and turn on rotate shells and the size to 4K again and apply. Click apply. Now select everything and press Ctrl plus L again. Now wait for some time till it calculates all the rotations and everything to have the best possible result. Now this is a better example than the previous version because it is wasting less space. Now let's apply a checker map to see. Select the object, go assign a new material, click on Lambert and click on this box, go to checker and turn on shading, and then repeat the tiling to something like 25 to see. Yeah, it looks very clean now, very clean UVs. Maybe we can increase the tiling a bit more to something like 50. Yeah, that looks much more better and give a lot more idea on how the UVs are unwrapped. So this is how we unwrap UVs inside Maya. This was just the basics. I still haven't talked about textile density and utilizing UV space. Like we have talked a little bit about how to utilize the UV space and things like that, but there will be more detailed videos on how to do that in the coming future. I hope you guys learned a lot, and thank you for watching and have a great day.